The candelabras cast liquid gold across the private dining room at Noctis, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. The kind of establishment where reservations required bloodline connections, not credit cards. Davina Mertens moved between the obsidian chairs with practiced invisibility, her black server's vest crisp despite the midnight hour, blonde hair pulled into an immaculate low bun. Thursday nights were typically quieter. But not tonight. 7 men sat around the circular table carved from a single piece of black walnut, their conversation a hushed murmur beneath the haunting strains of Chopin filtering through hidden speakers. Davina had learned years ago to make herself transparent during these late-night gatherings. Powerful men conducting business after dark didn't appreciate interruptions about wine selections or dessert preferences. She approached to refresh crystal wine glasses, moving with careful silence. The man at the head of the table didn't look up, his attention fixed on ancient documents spread before him like treasures from a forgotten century. Stefan Djokovic. Even without the manager's urgent, almost frightened briefing about tonight's guest, Davina would have recognized power when she saw it. He wore an immaculate white suit that seemed to glow against his silver-streaked dark hair, tailored so perfectly it appeared sculpted to his frame. His face belonged in Renaissance paintings, all aristocratic angles and timeless authority. But his eyes made her breath catch. Impossibly pale gray like winter fog over frozen rivers, they scanned documents with predatory focus that made everything else in the room fade into irrelevance. "The territory agreements are acceptable," one of the men said in English, his accent carrying the weight of Eastern European centuries. "Full control of the Eastern Seaboard bloodlines. Your house will oversee all transitions through existing channels." Davina refilled water glasses, her movements mechanical. She'd served hundreds of unusual business dinners in her 2 years at Noctis. This one looked no different from the others, just wealthy men in expensive suits making deals she'd never understand. "The covenant documents are here," another man added, sliding leather-bound papers across the polished surface. "Signed by the regional covens. Everything is legitimate." Stefan leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin with centuries of practiced patience. "My advisors will review before I sign anything. Standard protocol." His voice carried the ghost of medieval Serbia, smooth as aged whiskey. The first speaker laughed, the sound too sharp for the elegant room. Of course. We expect nothing less from House Djokovic. Your reputation for thoroughness spans continents." Davina moved toward the far end of the table to collect empty plates. 2 men sat slightly apart from the main conversation, their heads bent close together in shadow. They spoke quietly, words tumbling out in rapid syllables that made Davina's hands still for just a fraction of a second. Russian. Not modern Moscow Russian but something older, aristocratic St. Petersburg dialect from another era. The language her grandmother had taught her during long afternoons in their cramped foster care apartment, insisting Davina remember the old country even though they'd been in America for 3 generations. "Tuesday is perfect," one man murmured, his Russian flowing with an accent that didn't quite match the imperial dialect. "The stakes are already positioned at the harbor. When Djokovic signs and transfers authority to the new house location, we drive them home. The covenant takes the territory while he's dealing with the chaos." Davina's heart slammed against her ribs. She kept her face blank, years of service industry training allowing her to maintain the neutral expression of someone who understood nothing. Her hands continued their work, stacking plates with steady movements that betrayed none of the ice spreading through her veins. "The Romanian covens confirmed?" the second man asked, also in Russian, though his accent carried hints of something else beneath it. "Hungarian maybe." The realization made her stomach turn. "Yes. Once Djokovic is eliminated, the Crimson Covenant controls everything from Boston to Baltimore. The treaty signing is just theater. He won't leave this building intact if the signature comes through tonight. The king falls before dawn." Davina's mind raced. These weren't European diplomats. They were assassins posing as legitimate coven representatives, and Stefan Djokovic, whatever he truly was, had no idea he was walking into an execution. She glanced at him across the table. He was reviewing another document, a gold fountain pen poised over the signature line. His second-in-command, a striking woman with 1920s-era features who'd been introduced as Isadora, stood near the door with the kind of stillness that suggested combat training from a different century. Two other security personnel flanked the room's entrance, alert but not alarmed. No one else had noticed the conversation in Russian. Why would they? It was a language most people associated with novels and history books, especially in a city like New York where 100 languages mixed on every street corner. Davina picked up her tray of dishes and turned toward the kitchen, her pulse thundering in her ears. She could walk away. Pretend she'd heard nothing. She was a waitress working 3 part-time jobs, not a hero from some fantasy story. Whatever war these men were waging had nothing to do with her. But if she stayed silent, Stefan Djokovic would die tonight. And something in his ancient, weary eyes suggested the world would be darker for it. A single whispered warning in Russian. That's all it took to shatter Davina's invisible existence and plunge her into a world where immortal kings wage wars in shadows, where ancient enemies plot massacres, and where her voice, the one gift she'd always hidden, suddenly becomes the only weapon that can prevent supernatural civil war. What happens next will test everything she thought she knew about courage, mortality, and the terrifying price of being seen when you've spent your whole life disappearing. One choice. One moment. One language that connected 2 worlds that should never have touched. Subscribe now because this waitress just saved a vampire king's life, and her ordinary world will never be ordinary again. Davina woke to sunlight she'd never seen from this height before. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a living painting, the city stretching endlessly below in shades of steel and glass, the morning sun painting everything gold. She sat up in bed that felt like sleeping on clouds, silk sheets pooling around her waist, and tried to remember how she'd gotten here. The penthouse. Stefan's penthouse. After she'd whispered that warning in Russian, after the chaos that followed, inhuman speed, violence that defied physics, men moving faster than her eyes could track. After she'd learned that monsters were real. You're awake. A woman's voice, carrying the polished accent of old New York money, came from the doorway. She was striking in that timeless way that suggested either exceptional genetics or something else entirely. Dark hair in a fingerwave style from the 1920s, wearing a tailored suit that would have cost Davina 6 months' rent. I'm Isadora, Stefan's second-in-command. We met briefly last night, though you were in shock at the time. You're a vampire. Davina's voice came out steadier than she felt. Since 1924. Teacher before that. Upper East Side finishing school. Isadora moved into the room with unnatural grace, setting a tray of coffee and pastries on the side table. We need to discuss your situation. The Crimson Covenant doesn't forgive witnesses. You exposed their conspiracy, which makes you a liability they'll eliminate. You have 2 choices. Accept Stefan's protection here, or we arrange immediate relocation. New identity, new city, new life. Davina's hands trembled as she reached for the coffee. And if I choose protection? You stay here. Safe. Alive. But confined to a world you didn't ask to enter. Isadora's expression softened with something like sympathy. It's not an easy choice. The sun climbed higher beyond the windows and Davina noticed the absence. Where's Stefan? Vampires and sunlight don't coexist well. He'll appear at dusk. 6 hours of waiting felt like 6 years. Davina explored the penthouse. All dark wood and Gothic elegance. A library containing books in languages she recognized and others she didn't. Art that belonged in museums. She'd spent her entire life making herself small, invisible, unremarkable. Now she was trapped in luxury she'd never imagined, waiting to speak with a creature from nightmares. When the sun finally bled into twilight, Stefan appeared as if he'd materialized from shadows themselves. He still wore white. A different suit but the same impossible elegance. His pale gray eyes found hers immediately. I need to know why you warned me. No preamble, no pleasantries. You could have walked away. Should have. Why didn't you? Davina met his gaze despite every instinct screaming to look away. Because it was right. Murder is murder even if the victim is. She gestured at him, struggling for words. Say it. His voice carried 8 centuries of weariness. Vampire. Monster. Undead creature. Someone who didn't deserve to die in an ambush. The words came out quiet but firm. I don't care what you are. They were planning to kill you. That's wrong. Something shifted in Stefan's ancient eyes. He moved to the window, standing where sunlight had been hours before, and spoke without turning. I was born in 1187 Serbian nobility during the Crusades. Turned at 32 by a creature who thought immortality was a gift. I've ruled the eastern North American territory for 4 centuries. Thousands of vampires answer to my authority. I've seen empires rise and fall. And you? He finally looked at her. You risked your life for a stranger after knowing me for minutes. You were going to die. Death would have been a mercy 8 centuries ago. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as her. Yet here I am and here you are because you possess something I'd forgotten existed. What's that? Courage without calculation. Humanity without hesitation. Stefan's gaze held hers with uncomfortable intensity. I've existed for 8 centuries surrounded by immortals who feel nothing. Explain to me, an ancient who's forgotten what bravery means, how you made that choice. Davina wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the room's warmth. Courage isn't forgetting fear. It's choosing anyway. My grandmother taught me that. Stefan looked at her like she'd spoken some ancient language he'd lost centuries ago. Isadora interrupted their moment, entering with a tablet that displayed security footage and intelligence reports. We've identified the conspiracy's scope. Konstantin Volkov leads the Crimson Covenant, vampire supremacists who believe your rule has become too sympathetic to humans. They want to return to the old ways. Humans as cattle, vampires as apex predators, no more coexistence. She glanced at Davina. Your warning exposed them. They'll hunt you until you're eliminated. The Council of Elders? Stefan's question carried weight. Already questioning your judgment. A vampire king protecting a mere human. Isadora's expression suggested this wasn't good news. Davina stood, anger burning through her fear. I won't run from my own life. I won't become someone else because monsters are angry I interfered with murder. Stubborn. Stefan's mouth almost curved into a smile. That will get you killed. Cowardice seems worse than death. Then you stay. Stefan's declaration felt final, absolute. Under my protection. In my home. Until this threat is eliminated. He moved toward the door then paused. The guest suite is yours. Everything you need will be provided. But understand, you've entered a world that doesn't play by human rules. Hours later, when Manhattan's lights replaced the sunset and sleep refused to come, Davina found herself drawn to the library. Stefan sat in a leather chair, reading by candlelight despite electricity being available. The book in his hands looked ancient, the script unfamiliar. Medieval Serbian poetry, he said without looking up. Chronicling a world that no longer exists. Davina moved closer despite herself. What's it like? Living forever. Stefan closed the book with careful reverence. His pale eyes met hers and for the first time she saw the weight of centuries there. Imagine everyone you love turning to dust while you remain unchanged. 800 years of that. You learn to stop letting yourself love anything mortal. You learn to stop feeling entirely. That sounds like death anyway. Perhaps it is. His voice held something raw, vulnerable. Perhaps I died 8 centuries ago and simply forgot to stop moving. The moments stretched between them. Mortal and immortal, finite and eternal, something impossible already forming in the space where their eyes met. Then the alarm shattered everything. Red lights flashed throughout the penthouse. Isadora appeared instantly, supernatural speed making her seem to teleport. Covenant breach. They're coming through the lower floors. Stefan stood, and Davina saw the predator beneath the elegant exterior. How many? 6 that we've detected. Could be more. His pale eyes found Davina. Stay here. Do not leave this room under any circumstances. Stefan. Promise me. But the building shuddered with impact, and Davina knew her ordinary life had ended the moment she'd whispered that warning in Russian. The war had found her. And the night was far from over. 10 days in Stefan's penthouse felt like 10 years of beautiful imprisonment. Davina discovered that luxury couldn't replace purpose. She wandered through rooms filled with priceless art, read from Stefan's library, texts in 40 languages spanning 8 centuries of vampire history, and learned about a hidden world that operated beneath human awareness. Territory disputes that had raged for decades. Bloodline hierarchies more complex than any human monarchy. Ancient laws written when Constantinople still stood. But knowing about the world wasn't the same as participating in it. Stefan left each evening for diplomatic meetings, returning near dawn with the weight of immortal politics heavy on his shoulders. They'd talk. Conversations that started cautiously and deepened into something neither seemed prepared for. He'd tell her about empires he'd watched collapse. She'd describe languages she'd learned in foster care, each one a lifeline to connection when human relationships felt impossible. "You're going quietly insane," Stefan observed on the 10th night, finding her staring out at the city with the desperate expression of a caged bird. "I'm useless here." Davina didn't turn from the window. "Protected but pointless. I've spent my entire life working 3 jobs, studying languages until my eyes burned, fighting to matter. Now I'm just existing." Stefan's phone call came an hour later. "I have a proposition that might preserve your sanity." She met him in the library where he stood surrounded by diplomatic documents written in scripts she recognized: Cyrillic, Latin, even ancient Glagolitic. "Ancient vampire covens negotiate in dozens of languages," he began without preamble. "Most translators I employ are vampire-affiliated, which means potentially compromised. I need someone I trust absolutely. Someone who understands not just words, but the cultural weight beneath them. You want me to work for you? I want to give you purpose while keeping you safe." His pale eyes held hers. "And selfishly, I need someone who sees nuance, not just vocabulary. You have that gift." The first test came within hours. Vladimir, a Romanian coven master who'd survived 4 centuries of Balkan power struggles, arrived to negotiate territorial boundaries. He spoke Old Romanian, a dialect extinct since the 1700s, formal and archaic, laden with nobility protocols that would have been incomprehensible to modern speakers. Davina didn't just translate. She understood the cultural architecture beneath each phrase. When Vladimir used a formal address that contained a veiled insult, suggesting Stefan's authority was circumstantial rather than earned, she caught it immediately and responded in kind. Equally formal, equally pointed, defending Stefan's legitimacy while honoring the elder vampire's age and status. Vladimir's ancient eyes widened. "In 4 centuries, no human has understood our protocols. You honor the old ways, Miss Mertens." Stefan's expression held something close to pride. "She honors all languages. That's her gift." The treaty was signed within the hour. What happens when a mortal waitress becomes the bridge between warring immortals? When her voice, the one she spent years silencing, suddenly holds the power to prevent centuries-old wars. Davina stood at the precipice of 2 worlds, neither fully accepting her, both desperately needing her. The vampire covens were circling, Constantine's rebellion was spreading, and Stefan was looking at her like she might be worth risking a kingdom for. If you're as captivated by Davina's transformation as we are, subscribe now, because what comes next will change everything she thought she knew about power, mortality, and love. Afterward, Stefan took her to a restaurant she'd never have found. No sign, no website, access through an unmarked door in the meatpacking district. The dining room was empty except for them, the staff moving with vampire grace, serving food that looked like art. "I wanted to study linguistic anthropology," Davina admitted over wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to. "Understand how language shapes culture, how words create entire worldviews. But college requires money I didn't have." "Why did you stop caring about your kingdom?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Isadora said you used to be different. More engaged." Stefan's expression went distant. "When you've watched empires rise and fall for 8 centuries, caring seems pointless. Everything ends. Kingdoms, alliances, even immortal bonds. Why invest in temporary things? Maybe that's exactly why it matters." Davina leaned forward. "Because it's temporary. Because these moments, this conversation, this night, will never exist again. Isn't that worth more than endless repetition?" Stefan looked at her like she'd revealed some profound truth he'd spent centuries avoiding. How do you make 28 years seem wiser than 8 centuries? The moment shattered when they stepped outside. The dark sedan appeared from nowhere, moving with predatory intent. Covenant vampires exploded from the vehicle, fangs bared, moving with inhuman speed that made Davina's breath catch. One reached for her, fingers like steel closing around her arm. Then Isadora was there, intercepting with violence that defied physics. Vampire combat wasn't elegant. It was brutal, primal, impossibly fast. Bones cracked. Bodies moved faster than Davina's eyes could track. Stefan arrived like a storm made flesh. The vampire holding Davina released her instantly, survival instinct overriding orders. Stefan dispatched both attackers with centuries of combat expertise. Efficient, terrifying, absolute. When it ended, bodies turned to ash on the Manhattan pavement. His hands found her face, checking for injuries with surprising gentleness. You're not safe in the city anymore. We moved to the estate. Tonight. In the car, his hand found hers in the darkness. I won't let them hurt you. I swear it on every year I've survived. The Westchester compound rose from wooded grounds like something from Gothic fairy tales. Stone and iron, gardens that bloomed in shadow, a library containing texts in languages humanity had forgotten. Davina's sweet overlooked gardens where twilight lingered, the only time Stefan could walk outside with protection. That first evening he showed her night-blooming flowers that opened as darkness fell. 8 centuries, he said quietly, and these are the only flowers I can watch bloom. Sunlight gardens are memories now. Do you ever wish you could see a sunrise again? Stefan's pale eyes found hers in the twilight. Every day for 800 years. But if I could choose one sight to see again. He paused, something raw crossing his ancient features. I think I'd rather watch you in sunlight. Live vicariously through your mortality. The distance between them disappeared. Davina felt the pull like gravity, saw the same impossible want reflected in his eyes. His hand reached for her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with supernatural gentleness. Stefan. Isadora's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She appeared at the garden entrance, expression grim. The council demands immediate meeting. They're questioning your protection of the human. It's becoming a political liability they can't ignore. Stefan's hand dropped, but his eyes held Davina's. Tell them I'll attend. But my answer won't change. As Isadora disappeared, Davina whispered, What happens when the council decides I'm not worth the political cost? Then they'll learn, Stefan said quietly, that some things are worth any price. Even kingdoms. The night pressed closer and somewhere in the darkness, enemies were gathering. The fragile peace couldn't last much longer. 4 weeks at the estate transformed Davina from protected prisoner to indispensable asset. She worked as Stefan's chief diplomatic liaison now. Mornings spent studying vampire political structures, evenings translating negotiations between covens who'd been enemies since the Renaissance. They developed routines that felt dangerously domestic. Stefan teaching her the intricate hierarchies of immortal society. Davina explaining TikTok and cryptocurrency to a creature who remembered when electricity was revolutionary. Twilight walks became ritual, the only time Stefan could tolerate indirect sun with protective clothing and ancient charms. They'd wander the estate gardens as day surrendered to night, conversations deepening into territories neither had explored with anyone else. I've lived 800 years, Stefan said one evening, watching night-blooming jasmine unfurl. You've lived 28. Yet somehow you understand life better than I do. Davina plucked a fallen petal, studying its perfect impermanence. Because mine ends. Every moment costs me something, time I'll never get back. Yours are free. That's why they're worthless to you. Infinite supply makes everything meaningless. Stefan went silent and Davina saw she'd struck something raw. This mortal woman with her finite existence dissecting 8 centuries of his immortal philosophy with uncomfortable accuracy. Isadora found Davina in the library days later, moonlight streaming through Gothic windows. You should know what they're saying in vampire society. That Stefan should turn you. Make you immortal so you're appropriate for a king. I don't want to be a vampire. The words came out more forcefully than intended. Then you're braver than I was. Isadora's expression held something like admiration. I chose immortality over death in 1924. Tuberculosis would have killed me within months. But you're choosing mortality over. She gestured toward where Stefan worked in his study, over him. That requires courage I'm not sure I possessed. If he only wants me as a vampire, he doesn't want me at all. The Elder Council arrived on a Wednesday, 5 ancient vampires whose combined age exceeded 3 millennia. They gathered in Stefan's formal reception hall, all marble and ancestral portraits, examining Davina like a curiosity that had overstayed its welcome. Elder Natalia spoke first, her Russian accent carrying 9 centuries of authority. She's mortal. Fragile. Constantine will use her to destroy you. Turn her or release her. Those are your only logical options. Stefan stood beside Davina, his presence a wall of controlled power. She remains as she is. Under my protection by her choice. Then you make her your weakness, another elder interjected. A king cannot afford mortality when his enemies are immortal. Davina had been silent through 10 minutes of them discussing her like furniture. Now she stepped forward and the room's temperature seemed to drop. I'm my own person. Not his possession to transform at your convenience. The council stared. Natalia's eyes narrowed dangerously. Humans don't speak in these proceedings. This one does. Stefan's voice carried absolute finality. She saved my life when she had every reason to stay silent. Ancient law grants her voice here. The tension could have shattered diamond. 2 days later, Isadora burst into Davina's suite with intelligence that changed everything. The Covenant is changing tactics. They're not hunting you directly anymore. Stefan arrived moments later, his expression carved from stone. Show her. The video message from Constantine played on Isadora's tablet. His cold aristocratic features filled the screen, Russian accent thick with centuries and malice. Trade your crown for the mortal or watch her species burn. East Village, Brooklyn, 3,000 humans. You have 3 days, Coral. The word dripped with mockery. King. The council's response came within hours. Choose. Abdicate to save human lives or sacrifice Davina to maintain rule. No third option. No compromise. Davina found Stefan on the estate's highest terrace, overlooking grounds that had witnessed 4 centuries of history. Hundreds could die because I warned you. Guilt threatened to strangle her. I can't. I won't be the reason innocent people burn. Stefan turned and she saw something fierce and desperate in his ancient eyes. His hands framed her face with supernatural gentleness. Thousands have died in my 800 years. I've made calculated sacrifices, chosen duty over mercy more times than I can count. But you. His voice broke on something raw. You're the first thing in centuries that's made me remember why I wanted to live, not just exist. I've ruled out of obligation. Empty duty. You gave me reason beyond survival. Stefan, you can't burn your kingdom for. I'm not burning it. His grip tightened fractionally. For the first time in 400 years of ruling, I'm fighting for something worth the centuries I've endured. For something that makes those centuries mean something. The distance between them evaporated. Davina rose on her toes as Stefan leaned down, and their lips met with the weight of impossible choices and finite time. Not explosive passion, deeper than that. Acknowledgement of love that defied every logical argument against it. I'm immortal, Stefan whispered against her mouth. You're human. We have no future. But I choose this anyway. I don't want forever. Davina's fingers tangled in his silver-streaked hair. I want however much time we actually have. However brief. However doomed. They kissed like drowning people finding air, desperate and necessary and utterly without hope. Later, wrapped in Stefan's arms as moonlight painted shadows across his study, Davina felt clarity cut through her fear. There has to be another way. I won't let people die. And I won't let you lose everything you've built. There is no third option. The Covenant has ensured it. Then we make one. Davina pulled back to meet his eyes. We don't accept their terms. We change the entire game. How? You've spent 800 years thinking like an immortal. Playing by ancient rules, moving in centuries-long strategies. Her mind raced through possibilities, patterns emerging from the intelligence reports she'd studied. Sometimes the mortal perspective is the one nobody expects. Sometimes finite thinking is exactly what immortal enemies can't predict. Stefan studied her face with growing recognition. What are you planning? Davina's eyes focused with dangerous clarity, her grandmother's voice echoing through memory. Courage isn't forgetting fear. It's choosing anyway. Something that will either save everyone or get me killed, she said quietly. But I'm done being protected while others die for my safety. And in that moment, Stefan saw the woman who'd warned a stranger in Russian, who'd refused to run, who'd walked into his world without flinching. The woman who was about to do something terrifyingly brave. 2 weeks later, December brought darkness that arrived like a promise and a threat. Winter's early nightfall benefited vampire activity, and Stefan spent long hours negotiating with other territory rulers. Chicago's Coven Master via encrypted video, European elders through channels that predated the internet, West Coast vampires who still remembered when California was Spanish territory. Building alliances in case Constantine's rebellion ignited civil war. Davina studied intercepted Covenant communications in Stefan's war room, her polyglot brain finding patterns Isidora's intelligence network had missed. Serbian phrases buried in Russian text. Old ceremonial language that referenced medieval vampire rituals. And then, the critical detail that made her pulse spike. They're planning a formal gathering, she told Stefan, spreading decoded messages across his desk. Abandoned cathedral in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Constantine is consolidating all rebel factions for a ceremonial challenge to your kingship. Stefan's pale eyes scanned the documents. When? 3 days. I can infiltrate their gathering. The words escaped before Davina could reconsider. Stefan's response was immediate and absolute. No, absolutely not. You'd be surrounded by vampires who want you dead. They need a translator. Davina had thought this through during sleepless hours. The Covenant has Russian, Serbian, Romanian, Hungarian factions that don't all speak common languages. I approach them claiming I'm disillusioned with being your protected pet. They might believe I'm defecting. They'll kill you the moment they suspect. Or they'll use me. Vampires are arrogant about humans, they won't expect me to be a threat. She met his gaze steadily. I can gather evidence of their massacre plans. Record everything. Give the council proof they need to authorize military action. Isidora entered then, her expression grim. We have a bigger problem. Someone in Stefan's inner circle is feeding information to Constantine. That's how they've stayed one step ahead. She placed a tablet on the desk showing communication patterns. Your closest confidants are potentially compromised. Stefan's jaw tightened dangerously. Then an external asset is our only option. The council contact confirmed it, Isidora continued. Without concrete evidence of planned human massacre, they won't authorize action against the Covenant. Civil war requires council approval, or Stefan acts as rogue king and loses legitimacy. The room fell silent with the weight of impossible choices. Stefan crossed to the window, his back rigid with 8 centuries of instinct screaming against what logic demanded. I've lost everyone I ever loved, to time, to death, to the cruelty of immortality. I can't. His voice fractured. I won't lose you to my own war. Davina moved behind him, placing her hand on his shoulder. You don't own me. You can't lose what isn't yours to keep. But you can trust me to fight beside you. I'm immortal. I'll heal from anything. He turned and she saw raw fear in his ancient eyes. You won't. One mistake and you're gone forever. Permanently. While I continue for centuries knowing I failed to protect you. That's always been true. Mortality is the price of being human. She stepped closer. But I'd rather die fighting than live as the reason 3,000 innocent people burn. Stefan's hands framed her face with trembling gentleness. If I agree, if you wear tracker audio recorder blessed silver cross that burns vampire flesh on contact. First hint of real danger, I'm coming for you. Cathedral walls, holy ground, ancient magic. None of it will stop me. Agreed. But you let me try. You don't sabotage it because you're afraid. I'm terrified. The admission seemed to cost him centuries of pride. 800 years and I've never been terrified. You did that to me. Davina managed a smile despite the fear threading through her veins. Good. Fear means it matters. 5 days of preparation transformed terror into competence. Isidora taught her vampire combat. Not to win but to survive long enough for extraction. How to use their speed against them. Exploit the arrogance that made ancient creatures underestimate human cunning. Silver weapons that burned undead flesh. Blessed silver even more effective. Vampire vulnerabilities varied by age, but all feared sunlight. Most respected holy symbols and ancient invitation rules still bound them to certain protocols. The cover story was crafted with meticulous detail. Tatiana Koslov, disillusioned translator who'd realized Stefan's protection was just another cage. Backstory claiming she'd recognized human inferiority, wanted to serve the winning side. Stefan's people created months of falsified records, digital footprints that would survive scrutiny. Late nights, Davina memorized vampire etiquette and formal address protocols. Stefan taught her ancient ceremonies, explaining rituals that predated written language. They didn't sleep, he didn't need to, she couldn't through anxiety that tasted like copper on her tongue. What would you do if I died? The question escaped during one of those suspended hours between midnight and dawn. Stefan's answer came quiet and devastating. Exist. For centuries more. Without anything making that existence meaningful. Don't ask me to prepare for that, Davina. I've survived 800 years. I don't know if I could survive losing you. The night before infiltration, they stood on the estate's highest rooftop. Manhattan glittered in the distance, the cathedral in Brooklyn visible as a dark silhouette against city lights. Dawn approached, the hour Stefan must retreat indoors. In 800 years I've never asked anyone to stay. His voice carried weight that transcended time. Because everyone leaves eventually. Death, betrayal, time, they all steal what I care about. But I'm asking you, after tomorrow, after this is over, stay. However many years your mortality grants. Stay with me. Davina turned in his arms. I'm coming back. We're both going to survive this. Promise me. I promise I'll fight like hell to get back to you. They held each other as sky lightened from black to gray, the sun preparing to rise and drive Stefan underground. His lips found hers with desperate gentleness, memorizing the taste of her mortality. Come back to me, Davina. His final words before retreating inside. Morning arrived cold and crystalline. December light turned the world sharp-edged and merciless. Davina dressed in dark clothes that wouldn't draw attention, the blessed silver cross heavy around her neck, subcutaneous tracker positioned where even vampire senses would miss it. Isadora found her at the estate entrance. You're either the bravest human I've met or the most foolish. Probably both. Davina's laugh came out shaky. The car waited, engine running, exhaust clouding in winter air. Stefan wouldn't see her off. If he did, he'd stop her. His absence felt like a wound. Davina slid into the back seat, and through the estate windows she thought she saw movement. Stefan watching from shadows where dawn couldn't reach, already in agony despite the mission not yet begun. The car pulled away, heading toward Brooklyn. Toward an abandoned cathedral where 30 vampires were gathering. Where one wrong word, one misplaced phrase in Serbian or Russian, would mean death faster than human eyes could register. Davina touched the silver cross, feeling its blessed weight. 3,000 lives depended on what happened next. So did whatever impossible future she and Stefan might have. The city blurred past and Red Hook grew closer with every heartbeat. The abandoned cathedral rose from Red Hook's industrial wasteland like a Gothic corpse, broken stained glass, crumbling stone, but ancient power still thrumming through foundations laid when Brooklyn was farmland. Davina stepped through the massive doors as Tatiana Koslov, and 30 pairs of predatory eyes fixed on her with hunger that transcended physical appetite. Vampires couldn't enter churches without invitation. Old magic still binding. But Constantine had positioned himself at the altar in deliberate blasphemy, his cold aristocratic beauty framed by centuries of desecration. Stefan's pet translator. His Russian accent carried 600 years of frozen malice. What makes you think we'd trust you? Davina channeled arrogance she'd learned from watching Immortal negotiations. Because I'm tired of being human in a vampire's world. You offer real power, not protection that's just another cage. Constantine moved with inhuman speed, suddenly inches from her face. Eloquent. Translate this, if you can. He handed her parchment inscribed in Old Church Slavonic, medieval Serbian that predated modern language. Davina read flawlessly, the formal declaration of war against Stefan's rule flowing from her lips like she'd been born to ancient vampire law. Around the cathedral, rebel factions, Russian, Serbian, Romanian, Hungarian, watched with intensifying interest. Impressive. Constantine's smile showed too many teeth. You're hired. But no. One betrayal and you'll wish Stefan's mercy was what you'd received. 90 minutes of horror followed. Davina translated between factions discussing coordinated attacks on East Village and Brooklyn. 3,000 humans targeted for massacre. Plans for Stefan's public execution, staked and left for sunrise. A new world order where humans existed as livestock, breeding programs ensuring perpetual blood supply. Every word recorded through her silver cross microphone. Every confession captured. She inserted subtle sabotage, tiny delays, microscopic inconsistencies in her translations that would sow future discord. But one elder vampire, ancient eyes holding 7 centuries of suspicion, watched too closely. Now, Constantine announced, the blood oath. Our formal declaration binding all participants to rebellion. He handed Davina text in Old Church Slavonic, ancient vampire law utilizing blood magic to supernaturally bind oaths. She began translating, but altered key phrases with medieval conjugation expertise. Changed binding clauses to non-binding versions through grammatical technicalities Constantine wouldn't notice unless he'd studied linguistics for centuries. Wait. The suspicious elder's voice cut through the cathedral. That conjugation is wrong. The blood oath clause requires subjunctive, not indicative mood. Constantine's eyes snapped to Davina, and she saw the moment he understood. You altered it. His hand closed around her throat with vampire speed, lifting her off the ground. You're still his. You were always his. The Silver Cross emergency beacon activated, signal transmitting to Stefan miles away. Stefan loves you? Constantine's laugh held centuries of cruelty. Perfect. We'll send you back to him in pieces. Let him watch his precious mortal die knowing he'll exist for eternity remembering his failure. Clever signal, he continued, squeezing harder. But your king can't enter this cathedral. Holy ground binds even ancient royalty. He'll listen to you die from outside these walls. Davina gasped through constricted airway. You don't know him as well as you think. Crash. Stained glass exploded inward in a shower of colored fragments. Stefan dropped through the window like vengeance made flesh, landing in a crouch as 800 years of power radiated from him like shock waves. King's privilege, he announced, invoking ancient vampire law. Ruler can breach sacred ground in defense of blood bonded. You threatened what's mine. Old laws forgive much in response. Chaos erupted. Vampire combat wasn't elegant. It was primal brutality at inhuman speed. Stefan's security team breached the cathedral doors, invitation rules shattered by his entrance. Isadora fought 3 vampires simultaneously, centuries of experience showing in every lethal movement. Davina pulled the blessed silver knife from her boot, stabbing the vampire lunging for an injured security member. The creature shrieked, silver burning undead flesh like acid. Stefan and Constantine collided at the altar. 800 years versus 600, all pretense of civilization abandoned. This was what immortality truly meant. Not elegance and eternal youth, but endless capacity for violence, for survival, for choosing who lives and who turns to ash. Davina watched Stefan fight for her, this ancient creature shedding centuries of restraint, and understood. He wasn't protecting property or pride. He was protecting the one thing in 800 years that made existence feel like living. The cathedral shook with supernatural fury, old magic crackling in the air, and Davina knew, whether Stefan won or fell here, she'd never be invisible again. Her voice had started this war. Now she needed to see it through. Subscribe to witness how a mortal woman ends an immortal war. The conclusion will shatter every expectation. She'll die anyway, Constantine snarled between savage exchanges. Humans last a moment. You'll grieve her for centuries. Then I'll have had one mortal lifetime of meaning instead of 800 years of emptiness. Stefan drove a wooden stake through Constantine's heart with absolute finality. Worth it. Ancient vampire turned to ash. Davina's recording played through cathedral speakers. Rebel vampires hearing their own massacre plans broadcast. Elder council members emerged from shadows where they'd been secretly observing. Elder Natalia stepped forward, her authority absolute. The Crimson Covenant is hereby declared enemies of vampire law. Surrender or face execution. Rebel support crumbled instantly. Most surrendered rather than face council justice. Stefan reached Davina, hands checking for injuries with terrified gentleness. I'm okay, she managed. It worked. Everything worked. He pulled her close and she felt trembling in his immortal frame. Never again. You're never doing anything like this again. We'll see. Despite everything, she smiled. The emergency tribunal convened immediately. Davina's testimony corroborated recorded evidence. Constantine's faction was stripped of territory, imprisoned or executed under ancient law. Stephen's rule validated by council. But Elder Natalia's final words cut through victory. The human cannot remain as she is. Turn her or release her from your protection. Our laws don't accommodate mortal entanglements for royalty. In a private chamber, council watching, Stephen turned to Davina. I can give you immortality. Centuries together. Transform you tonight. You'd be vampire queen, immortal beside me. And I'd lose the very thing you say you love. Davina met the council's ancient eyes. My humanity. My mortality. The urgency that makes me fight for every moment. I'd become like them, existing forever but not living. To Natalia, I remain human. Stephen accepts that. If that makes me unsuitable for vampire society, then vampire society is what needs to change. Stephen's voice carried 8 centuries of absolute authority. For 800 years I've lived because I couldn't die. She's taught me to live because life is precious, finite, meaningful. I won't take that gift from her. To the council, she remains human. Under my protection, recognized as independent entity in vampire law. If that costs me your approval, so be it. Elder Natalia studied them both. When she dies as mortals do, that grief will outlast empires. You choose suffering. I choose life, Stephen said quietly. Real life. Better 60 years of meaning than another 800 of emptiness. 6 weeks later, Noctis Restaurant, where everything began, hosted the first International Vampire Diplomatic Summit. 6 weeks ago, Davina Mertens was invisible, a waitress whose greatest skill was going unnoticed. Now she stood in diplomatic chambers where century-old covens hung on her every translated word, where vampire kings sought her counsel, where an immortal ruler looked at her like she held the key to something he'd lost 800 years ago. She'd remained human in a world of monsters, not because she was afraid of darkness, but because she understood the power of staying true to yourself when everyone demands transformation. And Stephen, he'd learned that the greatest strength isn't living forever, it's knowing what's worth protecting in the time you have. Subscribe now because their story, mortality and immortality, voice and power, humanity and love, continues in ways that will redefine what it means to be truly alive. Davina wore midnight blue, leading negotiations between North American and European territorial kings. Her voice switched effortlessly between Russian, Serbian, German, French, Romanian. Vampire nobility hung on her every word, respect earned, not given. On the rooftop afterward, Manhattan stretching below, Stephen asked, "The council still doesn't understand why I won't turn you. Do you?" "Completely. You reminded me that existence without end is meaningless. Mortality gives life weight, urgency, beauty. What happens when I grow old? When my 60 years runs out? Then I'll have had 60 years of real life instead of 800 years of emptiness. And I'll spend the next centuries ensuring the world you fought for survives. You'll have given my immortality actual purpose. They didn't solve the mortality problem, but they chose each other anyway." "I don't want forever," Davina whispered. "I know. That's why these years will matter more than all my centuries combined." They kissed under Manhattan's stars, mortal and immortal, choosing finite love over eternal loneliness. She'd remained human in a world of monsters, not because she feared darkness, but because she understood the power of staying true to yourself when everyone demands transformation. And Stephen had learned that the greatest strength isn't living forever. It's knowing what's worth protecting in the time you have.